Chapter 38. From that moment on, Corey refused to go back to church. The children and I followed suit. Honestly, I found it a relief. We had worked so hard trying to make it work, trying to overcome the tarnish of church splits. It made me realize how narrow the church experience had been, especially for the children. All the while, our hearts had yearned for the experience we'd had at Evangel Baptist. Big, open, friendly. More than anything else, I was confused, not knowing where to turn. The decision came one day when I was involved in the most distasteful job on the farm, plucking a chicken. On that day, all my long suffering left me. I threw the chicken to the dogs, declaring to myself and anybody else within a 6-acre radius, "I give up, I've had it." Freya had had it too. Her last encounter with Sick Chick had, according to her, practically cost her a finger. She had been trying to outrun him, and in taking the corner around the block, House had reached out her hand to touch the upright for support. Unfortunately, she had caught the ring on her finger on a nail. She screamed until Sig came to her rescue. According to them both, it had been a wild scene, but as I didn't see it, I can't swear to it. Nevertheless, she wore a big bandage for a week. Sig defined the problem. Of course, the rooster chases you. He doesn't like your lipstick. When Corey came in, I told him the news. "Okay, you didn't want to move to the farm, now I give in. I'm ready to move back to town." "Move back to town!" He had the same horrified look I'd seen when I had told him, "I want to move to the country." There were tears and sad moments. 3 years and 3 months of our lives were wrapped up in Happy Valley. We had learned so many things about animals and things about the spirit. Of course, doubts lingered. Was I simply being a quitter, or was it the sensible thing to do? I found good renters, a family that was obviously in the same mode as we had been when we moved there. They were delighted to take over Brucey and the geese and chickens. They were happy to have a corner in the barn, even though Corey was going to retain all the outbuildings for his equipment. It was a nostalgic moment when I stood with the warm, soft-voiced mother of their brood at the front room window and pointed down to Arlo's place. I realized I had never solved the mystery of Jean's age. In fact, my encounters with Jean had been less than I could count on one hand, and I never saw her in a dirndl. She always wore bib overalls, the same as Arlo, and for all I knew, hers were interchangeable with his because every Monday, the half-dozen pair hanging on the clothesline on the porch appeared to be all the same size. I explained Happy Valley's points of interest. She tried to get her bearings. West is Mount Scott, and let's see, east is... I smiled and repeated the words that had served us so well over the years. East is boring, not just a state of mind, but an actual place. Her last word surprised me. Are there any ghosts? I thought about Sick Chick, but what could I say? We hired a moving van, but even at that it took us all day to get moved. By 10 o'clock that night, Olav and the kids were asleep in their rooms upstairs. Corey and I were sitting in the big breakfast nook. The iron fireman in the basement kicked over and began to force hot air through the registers. Oh, joy. From now on, there'd be plenty of heat. "Haven't things turned out wonderfully, darling?" I said. "Here we are back home again with all this room. We've had 3 years of country life. Now we own a farm." Corey interjected, "We and the president of First National. We have a big barn for all of your equipment, and I've got wanting to live in the country out of my system." Corey looked at me with suspicion. "Yeah, given enough time, and you'll be wanting to move back again." I smirked, wondering what could ever make me consider such a thing. The kids adapted easily. Freya and Sig were attending Cleveland High School with kids they had known before our move to the valley. Sig said, "We didn't even have to get the Millers to help. Eric had to walk only a few blocks to Grout School on a good concrete sidewalk, and he made new friends with boys who lived close by. Almost immediately, however, I began to suspect that he was in the wrong company, but I was too busy with other things to investigate." As usual, Freya settled into a charmed life. A car, a real job, stretch pants, and an introduction to the world of modeling. She didn't really need a car, and we probably wouldn't have considered one, except for Corey's Uncle Jack, who had always promised that upon his death, his car would go to one of the children of the Gustafsson clan. And all the children wanted Jack's car, not because it was in good condition, with good tires and very low mileage, which it was, but for the more obvious reason. It was a sporty white Ford Roadster. Jack had left no will, so the car was put into probate, which meant that Corey, as the oldest son, had the option to buy. When Freya learned of this, she borrowed $75 from Corey, saying, "I'll make payments when I get a job." We were happy about that. On the day of the great acquisition, we all drove up to Grandma's house and Freya drove it home. We naturally figured that Freya would be satisfied forever, but before the engine cooled down, she asked Corey for a paint scraper. She had decided she wanted her car to be bright red. Corey said that since he had a big investment in it, he didn't want her to do the painting herself. Freya dickered with a friend who worked at a garage on Foster Road. His price was exorbitant, but he said if she'd do the preparatory work, he'd paint it in his spare time, for practically nothing. She, Sig, and whoever they could recruit, scraped, sanded, and installed masking tape. Unfortunately, considerable time elapsed between the masking tape and her friend's spare time, during which the car sat in the sun. She blamed her dad. "Why didn't you tell me what a messy job removing the sun-baked tape would be?" When it was finally finished, everyone agreed that she had the most beautiful car in town. Everyone, that is, except Cordy, a young man with whom she skied at the mountain. He had the same model. What a coincidence. He drove out one evening. We were all sitting in the lawn swing. Corey said, "It's the same model, all right." Eric whispered, "It isn't a pretty red, it's a dumb color." Sig said in disgust, "It's maroon." Cordy stepped out, looked at Freya's car for a long minute, shaking his head in disbelief. We waited for him to turn green with envy. He'd probably want to know the name of Freya's friend at the garage. He walked slowly around the car, stopped to examine a place where the masking tape had been especially stubborn, and scratch marks remained on the chrome. Then he demanded, "How could you paint a specimen car that color?" Corey was still waiting for a car payment, so he found a job for Freya, working a couple of hours after school at the sport shop of his friend, Hjalmar Vam. Freya was excited about having her own spending money, but if we'd known what she would do with her first paycheck, we'd have written out a whole new list of thou shalt nots. On payday, instead of greenbacks, she had a sack. Without a word, she headed for her room. When she came down the stairs, I couldn't believe my eyes. I took a deep breath, hoping to forestall a faint. On the body of our sweet, church-raised young daughter were the tightest, most skin-hugging ski pants I'd ever seen. If I'd known about exorcism, I'd have called for the elders. Freya's answer to my protest was that they were wind-resistant, cutting seconds off a skier's time. Besides, both Hjalmar and his wife Vera wore stretch pants. Corey didn't say much, just agreed he could wait 2 more weeks for his car payment. When that day came, Freya had neither money nor another sack. All she had was a limp excuse. Her whole check had gone to make another payment on her stretch pants. She hadn't realized that her first check had just been a down payment. When I finally saw her in action, I had to admit that she looked like Sonja Heine at the Olympics. Then, as if to prove her point, she came home with the news that she had fallen into an extraordinary opportunity. Her friend Linda, who had been elected the Rose Festival Queen, the top honor for any Portland high school girl, was given a job modeling high school clothes at one of Portland's department stores. And somehow, Freya was asked to model too. Corey was delighted. Yeah, now she can start making car payments. Eric was skeptical. How can she be a model when she never does the exercises on TV? Sig added, yeah, and she never wears high heels. I didn't have the answer, so I called Dor. She was green monster jealous. Here I've been all this time in modeling school and no offers. Naturally, Sig wanted a job too. I began reading want ads until one day, "Here's something, Sig. The Portland Baseball Club is hiring vendors." I had mentioned it somewhat jokingly, but Sig took me seriously. He went to apply. I expected he wouldn't qualify. He was too young. But of course I was wrong. He came home with a wide smile. I got the job. But how are you going to get back and forth? No problem. He took great joy in telling me. I'd take him to the end of the bus line. Then after work at 10, 11, or 12 o'clock, he'd call me when he was leaving the job, and I'd drive down to the end of the bus line and pick him up. After his first night on the job, we waited anxiously for a report. He sheepishly announced that he actually owed the company money. It seemed that each vendor was issued $10 in change in advance, which was, of course, expected to be paid back when settling up at the end of the evening. Sig had miscalculated somewhere along the line. We decided Sig needed a lesson on how to make change. We created a game which we played with real money. The whole family got in on it. So Sig continued vending, and I continued driving him to and back from the end of the bus line. You can bet I was looking forward to the day when he could drive.